Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadama Hyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuta Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, I'll just admit a few more people in the waiting room. Okay, so how did everyone go with the readings and with the, yeah? Yep, all good. Okay. Hope it wasn't too much. Chapter 2 has longer purports than chapter 1. So, yep, okay. Well, I think we will go ahead then with the class. I'll just share my screen. No more friendly talks. Yes, no more friendly talks. Okay, but we will resume our reading still from the friendlier talks. We'll resume where we left off last week. Let me just share my screen, start from current slide. Actually, I'll go back here. So I'll just quickly revise what we were getting up to. So at the end of last week, we were just touching upon Arjuna's doubts. So we had gone through and we talked about Duryodhana's diplomacy. We'd heard about the build-up to the fight, and then now we're hearing about Arjuna's despondency. We're hearing about him expressing his doubts, and these doubts are very central. They're very important because the whole Bhagavad-Gita is spoken in response to them, right? We are studying chapter 1 a fair bit, and I'm intentionally emphasizing it because I think if we don't really get chapter 1, we don't get the Bhagavad-Gita at all. The philosophy might seem nice and you'll get the message of the Bhagavad-Gita, but you won't really get why it's being spoken or how it addresses Arjuna's issue if you don't get the first chapter. That's why we're spending a fair bit of time in the first chapter before diving into all of the, all of the juicy philosophy that we're discussing in the second chapter, right? So it's important to really get our heads around Arjuna's train of thought, what was his issue, and all to understand what the remaining 17 chapters are going on about. So we have here Arjuna's doubts, and we were discussing those. And then we discussed a little bit about how Arjuna, he's a really good example for what we should aspire to really in being a spiritual, to use a cliche, a spiritual seeker, right? He really embodies all of that. He's in a difficult situation. He feels that confusion. He feels that pain, but yet he still has that soft-heartedness. He still has that realization, and we'll discuss this later on. But he has all of these points which really, really show us how to deal in these moments of difficulty, which is why, again, he's on something like a battlefield. Sometimes people will wonder, why couldn't he be just strolling around and Krishna decides to give him the Bhagavad-Gītā? And the reason why is because the knowledge of the Bhagavad-Gītā is very practical to the painful and difficult situation we are all in. We are all in a very painful and difficult situation. That's why, that's why this material world is such a rough place. It's said that, I don't know how many of you have ever been involved in preaching or outreach, but you might hear of preaching strategies, right? Or outreach approaches, right? You might have, oh, this is more bridge preaching. This is Western oriented preaching. This is more Indian bodied community preaching, right? We might hear this or that. And the material world actually itself has 3 types of preaching, however. And there's 3 types. They're adhibhautik klesh, adhyatmika klesh, and adhidaivik klesh, right? They're the 3 types of suffering. All of the suffering in this world is the preaching mission of the material world, right? If you don't know what those 3 are, we'll touch upon them in Nectar of Instruction. So this material world is inherently a place of suffering and difficulty. The Bhagavad-Gītā is very self-awaredly making itself relevant to us by being present in a difficult situation, in a painful situation, right? So all of these things and more, we were discussing them next week. I won't get into them too much again. So then, now we will continue reading from where we left off. We'll go through the shlokas and then we will finish this chapter. So we had just finished hearing Arjuna ask Krishna to bring his chariot forward. He says in text 23, he says, "Let me see those who have come here to fight, wishing to please the evil-minded son of Dhritarashtra," right? So he's curious, right? He's trying to see who has come here to oppose me, right? Who has come here to align themselves with Dhritarashtra. I mean, with Duryodhana and by extension, Dhritarashtra. And then we hear in text 24, Evam ukto Hrishikesho Gudakeshena Bharata Senayor Ubhayor Madhye Stapayitva Rathotamam. Maybe Rani Mataji, would you like to read out the English? It's text 24.
Yep. Sanjaya said, "O descendant of Bharata, having thus been addressed by Arjuna, Lord Krishna drew up the fine chariot in the midst of the armies of both parties."
Okay, thank you very much. So one thing that needs to be emphasized in this first chapter and for the first 10 texts of chapter 2. Nandan Prabhu, are you saying something? Okay, that needs to be addressed in this section is the use of names. Very many different names are being used for Krishna and Arjuna, and all of them are intentional. Prabhupada, he will comment on some of them. Our previous acharyas have commented on others. But every single name that's used, Prabhupada in the English, he'll often translate it as Krishna, right? But in the Sanskrit, when we see, Prabhupada has very nicely given us the word for word, so we can trace out which different names for Krishna are being used, which different names for Arjuna are being used. So who can tell me, looking through, what is the name of Krishna that is being used and what is the name of Arjuna? 2 different people. One person tell me the name of Krishna and one person tell me the name of Arjuna that's being used in this text.
Hrishikesha for Krishna.
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. Very good, nailed it.
For Arjuna. Gudakesha for Arjuna.
Yes, the slide gives it away, doesn't it? No, but thank you very much, Mataji. That's exactly it, right? Gudakesh and Hrishikesh. So these names, they all have meanings, and those meanings are very, very relevant to what we are discussing. Hrishikesh, as we know, means Lord of the senses, master of all the senses, right? This is the difference between Krishna and ourselves. Our goal is to master our senses, but Krishna has already mastered everyone's senses. So Hrishikesh, right, the master of the senses. And if he's the master of the senses, then he's the master of the whole world, because what rules the world but everyone's senses, right? Our senses are driving the world. And now Krishna is here and he is ruling our senses, and therefore he is ruling the world. But what are we hearing? Hrishikesh, who rules all the senses and thereby, by extension, rules all the world, he is being ordered by Arjuna to drive the chariot, right? He is being instructed, and he is very, very nicely carrying out the instructions of Arjuna. He who has conquered the whole universe by being the master of all senses is being mastered by his devotee. This is a purport that we can pull out from Hrishikesh. And then we have Gudakesha, which I'm pretty sure is one of the potential questions that might come up in your closed book exam. Gudakesha, in the purport, Prabhupada, and this is also the main definition that's given by our acharyas, means he who has conquered sleep, right? So why does this come up? Firstly, to emphasize that, well, in a sense, Arjuna also has mastered his own senses, right? Hrishikesh is a master of all the senses, which is the perfection of Krishna, but it's never the perfection of the individual soul to master everyone's senses, but it is the perfection of the individual soul to master their own senses. And therefore, Gudakesha, somebody who has conquered or mastered sleep, is truly someone who has conquered their own senses. However, deeper more, it means that one who has conquered sleep is one who is not illusioned, right? But Arjuna, so therefore we know Arjuna can't be illusioned, and we do know that. Prabhupada has mentioned that in the introduction. But even more so, it also indicates that sort of irony to the fact that he's about to be put to sleep, but it's not a material sleep, right? Because he's conquered material sleep. He's conquered material illusion. The illusion he is about to enter into is a mystical, spiritual illusion. He is about to be put to sleep in a mystical way by the spiritual potency of Krishna. So this is, these are some meanings. You can pull out all sorts of significance. What I found interesting is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He sometimes gives very rasic descriptions in his commentaries. And he's given this really interesting definition of Gudakesha. Maybe Tarun Prabhu, would you like to read out this definition given by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur? Oh, and just quickly before, I'm sorry, I asked you to speak, and I just needed to say one thing. In the test, though, when you get asked, please give he who has conquered sleep as your definition. These ones are interesting for further study, but in the test, by and large, we follow the what's given in the purports. Okay, Tarun Prabhu, please.
Here is the significance of the word Gudakesha. Akesha means Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. Gudakesha means Arjuna, who gives Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva the experience of the sweetness of the Lord's affection, just as sugar, Guda, gives the experience of sweetness. Therefore, Gudakesha refers to he who, by bringing Krishna under his control, gave Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva the opportunity to experience Krishna's sweetness. Where the Supreme Lord Krishna, the crown jewel, source of all avatars, being controlled by Prema, followed the orders of his servant Arjuna, how could Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva, his mere expansions are guna avatars, show off any of their powers? Instead, they felt they had reached the pinnacle of perfection by manifesting affectionate feelings for the Lord themselves, inspired by Arjuna.
Thank you, Prabhu. So we can see this is a very interesting definition. So these three personalities, they're all so filled with the sweetness of seeing Arjuna do this. And we see this also in Bhagavatam. We know very famously Vishnu, he steals the children of the Brahmin. It's at the end of the 10th canto, but chronologically, it's actually happened before Kurukshetra. And in that, when Krishna and Arjuna, when they go to rescue the children of the Brahmana who have been kidnapped by Mahavishnu, what does he say? He says, I've kidnapped these children just so that you two would come save them and I might have your darshan. He doesn't say just so I may have darshan of Krishna, but he also says that I might have darshan of Arjuna as well. So we find here, Arjuna, he's a very, very splendid personality, right? I'm just sort of prefacing this so that we're very clear that Arjuna is not as much of a fool as Krishna starts chastising him as. That's all a pastime. One interesting point, and this is a little tangential, but I remember once, who was it? Kamsari Sena Prabhu. He once asked me a question. I couldn't answer it, but now I found the answer. Is that he asked, if we are Gauriya Vaishnavas, and we are Gauriya Vaishnavas, where does this name Gauriya come from, right? This name Gauriya, it means a certain area in Bengal, right? It means the Gora district. So how can we say if we are Gauriya Vaishnavas, we are beyond the material platform, right? We are an international movement filled with Vaishnavas who are much, much more than just from Bengal. As worshipful as the devotees from Bengal are, we have worshipful devotees from all over the world. So why then would we still call ourselves Gauriya Vaishnavas, right? And it was an interesting question. The answer that I found, and this might not be a definitive answer, but it is a answer, is, does anyone know why the Gora district was called the Gora district? Does anyone know? It was named that way because there was a lot of sugarcane that was grown there. It comes from the word, see the word here, Gurda, means sugar. The Gora district was named after the sugarcane that grew there, right? So Gauriya means from the Gora area, because the Gora area is defined by the sweetness, right? The sugar, the nectar that comes there. So in the same way, we can say the Gauriya Vaishnavas, what is the defining characteristics of Gauriya Vaishnavism is that we very much emphasize the sweetness of Krishna, right? We very much emphasize the sweet madhurya aspect of Krishna, right? So in that sense, we can say we are Gauriya Vaishnavas because we are the sweet Vaishnavas, right? We are the Vaishnavas who focus in upon the sweetness of the Lord, right? Because this word Gora can also refer to sweetness in general, as it has been applied here. So Gauriya Vaishnavas are those Vaishnavas who really orient themselves around the sweetness of the Lord. So not only is it a geographical description, but it's also a philosophical one, because that is our philosophical orientation. Anyways, that was a little tangential, but we'll go on then to text 25. So Bhishma Drona Pramuktaha Sarvesham Cha Mahikshitam Uvacham Partha Pashyaitan Samavetan Kuruniti. Maybe we can have Varun Prabhu read out the English for text 25.
In the presence of Bhishma, Drona, and all the other chieftains of the world, the Lord said, just behold, Partha, all the Kurus assembled here.
Yes, so what has Krishna done here? Krishna has brought Arjuna right in front of Bhishma and Drona, right? And he's not done this sillily, right? He's not done this unintentionally, that they were just the closest people there. He's done this very, very much on purpose. And the reason why is Krishna, he's really trying to egg Arjuna along in this section, right? He's really, really trying to agitate him. He's very much going out of his way to get Arjuna to enter into his despondency, to get into his breakdown, right? He's brought him in front of Bhishma and Drona because that's where he knows Arjuna's attachment is. Arjuna is attached to Bhishma and Drona, right? This is why when he picked up his bow and arrow, he didn't start fighting. This is why he picked up his bow, his Gandiva bow, and he said, well, first I'll have a look, right? When he said, I want to see who has aligned themselves with that son of Dhritarashtra, he's saying, I want to see, are my dear and beloved Bhishma and Drona, are they still there on the other side, right? This is what Arjuna is asking. And Krishna, very nicely, he's drawing Arjuna right in front of them to say, here you go. And what does he say? Behold, all the Kurus assembled here, right? He's driving the point home. Here they are. Here are the Kurus who you didn't want to fight. Behold, here they are, right? He's agitating Arjuna. He's showing his attachment and he's pushing at it and pressing upon it, right? It's also said that there's a hint of sarcasm, right? This is meant to be a joke. Our acharyas agree, and Srila Prabhupada, he also insists this in his purport, that Krishna, he's sort of getting at something, right? He's not literally saying, behold the armies. Some say he's joking because he's saying, what else did you expect? You know, behold the Yadavas here. Of course, you know, there's going to be the Kurus here, right? So Krishna, he's joking, saying, what else did you expect? This is exactly what we knew would be here, right? So behold all the Kurus, right? On another sense, he's also saying, behold the Kurus. And he says, Partha, right? Why does he say Partha? He says, because you are Partha, because you are my relative, I've done you the favor of driving you over here in front of the armies. But I know already that this is pointless because you are already thinking to give up fighting, right? So he mentions Partha to say, I've only done this as a family favor to you, right? But in reality, I know you're already thinking of giving up. On the other hand, he's saying Partha to emphasize his family relationship to everyone else on the other side. So in one sense, he's emphasizing his own relationship to him. And on the other hand, he's doing it to emphasize thoughts of family and to think, wow, can't you see all of your beloved family members on the other side? Krishna, he's almost maliciously agitating and disturbing Arjuna. Right. And he can go on for a while about all the different sort of reasonings that are brought out to explain this. And then what happens, I won't read out the Sanskrit for the next few parts, just in order to maintain our time constraints. There Arjuna could see within the midst of the armies of both parties, his fathers, grandfathers, teachers, maternal uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, friends, and also his fathers-in-law and well-wishers. And Srila Prabhupada gives very nice examples of each one of those categories in his purport. When the son of Kunti, Arjuna, saw all of these different grades of friends and relatives, he became overwhelmed with compassion and spoke thus, Kripaya, right? He's completely overwhelmed with compassion and mercy. And then what does he say? Arjuna uvacha drishtve mam svajanam Krishna yuyutsum samupastitam sidanti mamagatrani mukham cha parishushyati. My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up. So here we find Arjuna, now he is beginning his arguments, right? And he's saying, this is the argument from compassion, right? And he's just saying, how can I do this? How can I fight? I'm so overwhelmed with compassion at seeing my relatives. This is painful for me to see. And we find here, he uses the name Krishna. Different acharyas explain this differently. Some just say Krishna is that very intimate name, right? It's that name revealed in the Maha Mantra. It means the all attractive. And it's being appealed to because Arjuna, he's just directly in that moment. He's not trying to make any point. He's just innocently and directly appealing to Krishna, the all attractive. Krishna, you are so beautiful and wonderful that being the all attractive, you cast out all the suffering in the hearts of your devotees. My heart is filled with all the pains and sufferings of this situation. And so I'm calling upon the name of Krishna, the all attractive, to attract away all of that pain and suffering and bring my heart towards you. And then he says, my whole body is trembling. My hair is standing on end. My bow Gandiva is slipping from my hand and my skin is burning. I am now unable to stand here any longer. I'm forgetting myself and my mind is reeling. I see only causes of misfortune. O Keshava, O Krishna, killer of the Keshi demon. So Arjuna here, some of you may wonder, Prabhupada, he mentions in the purport, hair standing on edge. And Prabhupada said, oh, even though it's not mentioned, he will have tears coming out of his eyes. What does this sound like when we, Gauriya Vaishnavas, hear hair standing on edge, right? On end and tears flowing down? What does it sound like to us?
Ecstatic symptoms.
Yes, exactly. What do we sing every morning? Or every morning if we wake up on time, right? Romanchakam pashru taranga bhajo, right? We find here the symptoms of ecstasy. And yet, what does Prabhupada say in the purport to text 29? Maybe Rohan Prabhu, would you like to read out just the first few lines of the purport to text 29?
There are two kinds of trembling of the body, and two kinds of standing of the hair on end. Such phenomena occur either in great spiritual ecstasy or out of great fear under material conditions. There is no fear in transcendental realization. Arjuna's symptoms in this situation are out of material fear, namely loss of life. This is evident from other symptoms. Also, he became so impatient that his famous bow Gandiva was slipping from his hand, and because his heart was burning within him, he was feeling a burning sensation of the skin. All these are due to material conception of life.
Jai. So even though it seems like ecstasy, we have to make it very clear. At this point, Arjuna has become bewildered. At this point, he has become bewildered by Yoga Maya, right? So it's interesting, right? Because they seem very similar, and this is the confusing nature, and we can't discuss this too much because in one sense it's tangential, but it is the interesting nature of spiritual life. It's very hard to discriminate these things. Externally, many things seem very similar, right? But the internal mood is very different. Of course, Arjuna's internal mood is that of a devotee, but now we're in a very complex situation where we essentially have to assume now that Arjuna is like you and me, right? A conditioned soul. At this point, he's fully transitioned into there. We are to understand he is acting like a material soul, and therefore, even though we know that he is always a pure devotee, and the pure devotee never falls down from their meditation on Krishna, right? The pure devotee is never agitated away, right? Unless it is for pastime. Even though we know this, still for now, we are going to be running with the assumption that Arjuna is illusioned as part of the pastime, right? We can assume at the beginning, Arjuna is like us, and hopefully by the end of the Bhagavad-Gita, we will be like Arjuna, pure devotees, completely unconditioned. So this is what he says. And then he goes and he says, I'm unable to stand here any longer. I'm forgetting myself and my mind is reeling. I see only causes of misfortune. O Krishna, killer of the Keshi demon. Now, Keshava as a name means many things. Keshav means like the one with the beautiful hair. There's even more rasic descriptions that are given. But in this context, we mean the killer of the Keshi demon. As we know, here we have a nice traditional artwork of Krishna fighting. And Keshi, of course, what is Arjuna saying here? He's saying, I'm having all of these struggles. I'm having all of these issues. Please, Krishna, right? As you slayed the Keshi demon, please slay these issues, right? Slay these doubts. But there's also a deeper point being had here, and we can still find Arjuna's wonderful qualities shining through. Even though Arjuna is acting now apparently on the material platform, he's still in the mode of goodness. He's still actually on the highest platform, the material platform. He's just no longer acting on the spiritual platform. Materially speaking, it's not that we will say he's as bad as Duryodhana, right? Duryodhana is bad, right? And Arjuna is much better. It's just that in terms of pastime now, they are both fully material. And how does that come through? Does anyone know? Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he has explained what all of the demons who Krishna killed, what they all represent. Does anyone know what Keshi represents? It's all right if you don't. This is not included in the purports. Okay, Keshi, he represents arrogance. Keshi represents pride. And so when Arjuna is saying, oh, killer of the Keshi demon, he's also saying implicitly that I am filled with a pride now. I'm filled with a false ego right now. Just the same as you killed that Keshi demon who represents pride and arrogance, please slay the false ego, the ego that has arisen in me now in this fight. And then we hear he begins his next argument. Why is this ego or pride? Well, we'll find in the argumentation, we'll find the argumentation that Arjuna brings. It's all built on his ego, right? It's built on his identification with everything. And we'll touch upon that as we get deeper in. That's why it's ego. And pride is because in general, he's sort of, he's filled with material conditioning, and material conditioning inherently is prideful, right? So he's saying, I'm bringing up all of these arguments very proudly, right? Trying to refute what you're saying. And so now, please slay the pride that I've brought in arguing against you, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so then we hear, I do not see how any good can come from killing my own kinsman in this battle, nor can I, my dear Krishna, desire any subsequent victory, kingdom, or happiness. And then we have the very, very long section here, which is the whole, oh yes, so in relation to this, our acharyas, they say that Arjuna right now, Arjuna's whole argument is actually built on Shastra. It's just that they don't mention them. In the same way that if I tell you, never was there a time when you and I didn't exist. If I mention that to all of you, right, or at least most of you, you would think, oh, of course, he's referencing Bhagavad-Gītā, right? I don't need to explicitly say it in order for it to be clear. The same is happening here with Arjuna. Arjuna, he is making points, but he is very clearly referencing famous Shastras. And they're all Dharma Shastras, Shastras pertaining to ethical conduct. So when he says, I cannot see any good that comes from this, this is referencing to a famous Shastra, which says that the sannyasi engaged in yoga and the warrior who dies facing the enemy attains the sun planet or the heavenly planets, right? So Arjuna, he's saying, I don't see any heavenly or good destination from this. And then he says, we have this really, really long English, 32 to 35, also long Sanskrit. Maybe Sri Mataji, would you like to read out text 32 to 35?
O Govinda, of what avail to us our kingdom, happiness, or even life itself, when all those for whom we may desire them are now arrayed on this battlefield? O Madhusudana, when teachers, fathers, sons, grandfathers, maternal uncles, fathers-in-law, grandsons, brothers-in-law, and other relatives are ready to give up their lives and properties and are standing before me, why should I wish to kill them, even though they might otherwise kill me? O maintainer of all living entities, I am not prepared to fight with them, even in exchange for the three worlds, let alone this earth. What pleasure will we derive from killing the sons of Dhritarashtra?
Jai. And it said that Krishna, in response to the previous shlok, he had said, there's no piety in killing, right? Nothing good will come of killing. Oh, but you will get the kingdom and you will get fame. And that's why Arjuna has spoken these texts. Now the names again are very pertinent. O Govinda, right? So he has addressed Krishna. Prabhupada writes that Arjuna has addressed Lord Krishna as Govinda because Krishna is the object of all pleasures for cows and the senses. By using this significant word, Arjuna indicates that Krishna should understand what will satisfy Arjuna's senses. So he's saying, oh Krishna, right? You are meant to make me happy. It's chant and be happy, not chant and not be happy. Why are you making me do this thing which will break my heart? And what does Prabhupada say in the next line? But Govinda, Krishna, he is not here to make us happy. We are here to make Krishna happy. And this is the mistake that Arjuna is making, right? So he's saying, what, oh Govinda, what happiness will I get from all of these things? You're Govinda, you bring the pleasure to the senses, but what you're saying is not bringing pleasure to my senses, right? It also means, Go can also mean the Vedas, right? And so Govinda means the knower of the Vedas. And he's saying, you know what the Vedas say. I'm referencing Shastras in my argument. And now you're telling me to go against them? How does this make any sense? So this is what Krishna is saying. Then in the next, in text 34, we hear the name Madhusudana. And this is some nice artwork I got from the Gita Press editions. I'm not endorsing the translations, but I can endorse some of the artwork. It's pretty nice. And here we find Madhusudana. Some people might wonder, who is the Madhu demon, right? If you go through Krishna book, you won't find Krishna slaying the Madhu demon, right? But what does Madhusudana mean? Slayer of the Madhu demon. Who is so you could say, I'm just reading Nandan's message. You could say that our acharyas attach that meaning more to Janardhan, which we'll touch upon later on. Our acharyas attach that definition to Janardhan because, well, we'll get to it when we touch on Janardhan, but Jana means people and Ardhan can either mean maintainer or destroyer. Yeah. So Madhusudana, right? Who can tell me which chapter of Krishna book does Krishna kill the demon Madhu?
It's not in the Krishna book, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. Thank you, Mrugank. Otherwise, we would have been waiting a long while to find that reference. What we do find if you go through Prabhupada's books, in the 7th canto, Prabhupada, he speaks about a demon named Madhu, but he talks about how Hayagriva has killed him. And actually, this is a pastime of Hayagriva. It's a long pastime, and I'll send the link for 2 reasons. One, that I don't want to say the whole thing, and the other, that I haven't studied it very well, so I can't remember the details confidently. But I'll send a link to that in the WhatsApp group. But essentially, it was a pastime where Brahma, he had the Vedic knowledge, and these 2 demons came out of his earwax. And what was it, one demon? Anyways, I'm revealing that I can't remember the pastime. But
Prabhu.
Pardon?
I think it's Madhu and Ketab.
Yeah, it's Madhu and Kaitab. It is. So they both come out, but I can't remember. I think in some Puranas it says they merge together or something, but I think in Mahabharata it doesn't. Anyways, so what they do is they steal, as you know, they steal the Vedic knowledge. I'm very much abridging the pastime. They steal it, and then Vishnu, he appears as Hayagriva. He does away with them, and he restores the Vedic knowledge. And I'm just mentioning this detail. Yes, Brahma yawned and they stole it. So I'm just mentioning this detail because this detail is very pertinent, again, contextually to what we're discussing, right? Because Arjuna, he's saying, oh Krishna, as Madhusudana, you restored the Vedic knowledge, right? And here you're asking me to go against it. You're asking me to contradict the Vedas. So please become Madhusudana again and restore Vedic knowledge. Don't keep encouraging me to contradict it. What are you telling me to do this? There's also an implicit meaning, right? In the same way that Keshava indicated that Arjuna was saying, conquer these ideas, conquer my misconceptions. In the same way, Madhusudana is saying, just the same as Hayagriva, Madhusudana restored the Vedic knowledge. Please restore in me the Vedic knowledge. Please restore in me the correct understanding of these things. And then lastly, now we hear, as Nandan Prabhu mentioned, Janardana, right? So Janardana can mean 2 things, Jana and Ardana. Jana means people, and Ardana either means the slayer or the maintainer, right? It's one of those fun points in Sanskrit. Because of the long A, we're not sure it can go either way, right? So Janardana, if it means, oh, slayer of the people, Arjuna's saying, Krishna, it's your job to kill people, not mine. You kill them, not me, right? So this is the point that Arjuna, he's making here. He's saying, you should kill these people, not me. You are Janardana. You are the killer of all people, right? Because as we know, we'll discuss this later on in Bhagavad-Gītā, all people are dead by Krishna's hand already, right? Because Krishna is the absolute original cause of all things. Sarva karana karanam. But if we take it as meaning the maintainer of all people, Arjuna, he's saying, come on, Krishna. You're Govinda, you're meant to make me happy. You're telling me to do something that won't make me happy. You're Madhusudana, the restorer of Vedic knowledge. You're not restoring Vedic knowledge. And now you're Janardana, the maintainer of all people, and you're telling me to kill people. Your qualities are completely contradicting your instruction right here. So like this, Arjuna, he's constructing his argument. And again, if we take it as the killer, it means Arjuna, he's saying, how about you kill them? Why do I have to kill them, right? You're the killer of all beings. So we find this here. And then sin will overcome us if we slay such aggressors. And the reason why Arjuna is saying this, our acharyas, they've explained how each text flows from the other one, right? From the previous one. So what he said here is that Arjuna then would have, after saying that I will get no pleasure from all of this, Arjuna would have said, well, you know, I can't do this anyways because it is a sin to kill your guru. This is coming back to Nandan's question last week or the week before, right? This still applies to all gurus, right? It is a sin to kill your guru. What to speak of your guru? It's a sin to kill your elder. We know India has still retained this very nice part of Vedic culture where you'll still see more traditional Indians will touch the feet, right, of elders when they see them, right? And this is a nice aspect, right? If this is what it's like in India, which is how do we put it, not as Vedic as it used to be, but if we can still see this in India today, right? That there's so much respect given to elders, how much can we imagine then the respect was in Vedic times, right? Today you were, and then to imagine it's not being said, don't touch their feet, and pay respects, it's saying, kill them, right? So this is a bit of an issue, right? However, then Krishna responds and he says, well, actually, though you have said this, we find that there are the 6 types of aggressors, and therefore you are valued, right? You are allowed to do this. Now, who are the 6 types of aggressors? Who can tell me? The first one's already on. I'll just leave it on there. There is the poison giver. Who else is there? Vidhi Mataji?
One who attacks with deadly weapons.
Yes, that's a number. Yeah.
Plunderer of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
One who occupies another's land.
Yeah.
And one who kidnaps a wife.
Yeah.
And one who sets fire to someone's house.
Yes, that's all of them. So very nice. And who can tell me how many? Who can tell me? Have the Kauravas done all of these to the Pandavas?
Yes.
Yes. We all know the pastimes, right? They light their house on fire, etc., right? They tried to poison Bhim, so on and so forth, right? They've kidnapped the wife at their gambling match. They've plundered their riches and they've occupied their land. All of these things have been done. So they're very justified in doing it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This could be a question in your closed book exam at the end of the module. Okay.
Prabhu, do you know what Vedic injunctions Prabhupada is talking about here, or is that just a...
I've got it right here.
Oh, right there.
Right there. I've read your mind. I've read your mind. There we go. Yeah, so it's in the Vishishta Smriti. As I've said, everything here, this whole conversation is actually based on Shastras, right? It's based on different Smriti Shastras, which are based on dharma and correct conduct. So here we find, here is the reference. Oh, yeah. I mean, you can read it out if you'd like.
Oh, sorry, I'm still...
Oh, okay. And then one might say, though, Arjuna. So this whole part of the conversation is brought out in the Acharya's purports. And then we'll have an activity after this session, and then we'll have our break after this section. One might say, oh, well, it's fine to slay an aggressor, right? It's fine to fight back in self-defense, right? But it's still a sin, right? It's still a sin to slay one who is one's guru, right? And if there is a conflict between Dharma Shastras and Artha Shastras, because what have been mentioned so far, Artha Shastras, then we should take the Dharma Shastra, right? The Dharma Shastra is higher, because what are Artha Shastras about, right? They're about just how to do well in life, right? How to prosper, how to, just how to have a decent existence. But Dharma Shastras are about doing what's right, right? And therefore, Arjuna, he's saying, even though you're saying that you're allowed to do this, according to Dharma Shastra, which is the higher consideration, according to that, we should not kill the guru, and therefore that rules over any shastra you might mention Krishna. And then what happens is Krishna, he says, well then, if this is the case and all of this is so wrong, then why is the other side fighting? And then we have text 37 to 38. Krishna, he's answering this. He says, "O Janardhan, although these men, their hearts overtaken by greed, see no fault in killing one's family or quarreling with friends, why should we, who can see the crime in destroying a family, engage in these acts of sin?" Right? So then Arjuna is responding, and he said, this is why they are happy, right? They are happy to fight because their hearts are overtaken by greed, right? This is why they are willing to do it, but I do not wish to become like them, right? Overcome by greed. Okay, now we'll quickly, for the next reason and the final reason, we will break out into breakout rooms and we will discuss the Kulakshaya, right? the destruction of the dynasty, the destruction of families. This is the final reason that's given, besides Arjuna just deciding not to fight. And what we'll do is we'll structure this one a little differently. We won't write up a list. If it's all right, I'll break you up into how many people are here, 16, 15. So let's do again 4 groups. So in each group, hopefully there'll be one person who'll be willing to do this. If you can all draw, not all draw, but each group draw one, collectively piling together, right? Draw a diagram describing the stages that the fall down is described in, because it's described stage by stage, right? Krishna says, and then if this, Arjuna says, if this happens, then this happens, right? It's like a flow chart. You get what I mean? So if you can draw up a flow chart, does everyone get the job, right? So if you can draw one in your notes on your paper, or you can do MS Paint if you'd like, or whatever. Okay, everyone's all good. Everyone gets the activity. And then when we come back, we'll share the drawings we've done. Okay, so 4 groups. Oh, whoops! I'm just creating the rooms. And and by the way, you will have. I'll give you 5 minutes, and if that's not enough time, then we will. I'll give you 5 minutes, and if somebody joined again, so I have to recreate the breakout rooms. I'll give you 5 minutes, and if that's not enough time, I'll extend the time. So I'll just create the rooms now. One second, Mataji's not coming up because she's joined and left.
Sorry, Prabhuji, I'm back now.
Yes, no problem, Mataji. It's just, okay, I'll just add you manually to a breakout room.
Okay.
Okay, I'll open the rooms. You will have. I'll give you 5 minutes, but if you need longer, I will. I'll give you more time. Okay, see you all on the other side.
Explain it again.
Yeah. Oh, I said recording. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, just making sure because I get paranoid now after that last time it didn't work. I'm excited to see all of your diagrams. I don't have one, by the way. This is a blank slide. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna like, if you guys can take photos of yours afterwards and send them to me, I'm just gonna add them to this slide. Like I do have one, how I would graph it out, but I left this slide in particular blank so we can pop all of yours in.
Oh, we didn't do a diagram. We just made lists.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine.
I didn't realize we had to actually.
No, yeah, it was meant to be a diagram, but that's all right. You've done what you've done. Yeah. Even then, you can send your list across. We'll pop it onto the slide. Okay, is that everyone back? I think that's everyone back. Okay, so we had 4 groups, and I always get mixed up who was in which group. I think let's have Vignaraj, Alex, Rohan, and Nicole, I think was a group.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see yours. I think you have screen sharing permission if you want to just screen share it.
It says I can't.
Oh, what?
Because you're screen sharing.
Oh, of course. Now try.
Yeah, works. Okay, so this is our one. Sorry for my handwriting. So we start off with destruction of the dynasty. And like Yeah, so the elder members shouldn't be killed, because then that's the destruction of dynasty, because then that leads to family traditions being stopped. And then that leads to irreligion increases. And then women become polluted, but then that's also because of irresponsible men provoking adultery in society. And then that leads to unwanted progeny by mixture of castes. So this was in like the end of the purport of that sloka. It said floods the human race at the risk of war and pestilence. And then this leads to like hellish life because of like no offerings, and then forefathers also fall down because no offerings to the forefathers. And then community projects and welfare activities are destroyed. And they all lead to like hell for everyone. That's pretty much it.
Jai. I think that's pretty cool. I like that one. That one's better than my one. That one's got more detail than mine. Very good. Jai. Okay. Another group was the tablet use. Very cool. Okay, then let's have Mrugank's group then. Mrugank Prabhu's group.
I think Vidhi Mataji is going to present. She is someone who has.
Jai.
Oh, okay. So probably we just took the extracts from the purport as is. So I'm just going to read out the stages. So first is that with the destruction of the dynasty, the eternal family tradition is vanquished, and thus the rest of the family becomes involved in irreligion. That's stage one. Stage two is when irreligion is prominent in the family, the women of the family become polluted. Stage three is that from degradation of womanhood comes unwanted progeny. Stage four, with an increase of unwanted population, causes hellish life, both for the family and for those who destroy the family traditions. The ancestors of such corrupt families, they fall down because the performance of offering them food and water are entirely stopped. And the fifth one is that by the evil deeds of those who destroy the family tradition and thus give rise to unwanted children, all kind of community projects and family welfare activities are devastated.
Jai. Yeah, that's the flow. Okay, then we had Mrunal Mataji's group.
We actually had Divyansh Prabhuji.
Yeah. I
Divyansh Prabhu.
I wrote it down because I have it in my notebook right here.
Yeah. Okay.
It's because we didn't have enough time for MS Paint.
No, that's fine.
So the first one is destruction of the dynasty, and it results in no spiritual guidance for the younger generation. And second one is without religion in family, women will become polluted. And so after that, it results in unwanted progeny population, and that leads to hellish conditions of life.
Jai. Very nice. Also, so with all of your lists and all, please take a photo, or if you did it digitally, like Vignaraj Prabhu's group, just send like I'm sure you can export as PNG or something. If just do that and send it into the WhatsApp group, please, so that I can put it into the slides. And then I think we had Nandan Prabhu's group. I heard there was a lot of Shastric debate. All the Brahmanas came and
we are not in unison on this. So we don't have one person who will be coming out. I think we'll be having a committee coming out. So I'll go first just to get ahead of it.
Schism in the Bhakti-śāstrī group.
Yeah. So of course, first is destruction. We don't have a chart because we were arguing.
We have a chart. We have a chart.
You have a chart. All right. Good. You can show the chart. So first, this is my personal list: destruction of dynasty, right? And from the destruction of dynasty, I personally split it out because I read 42, verse 42. It says, "By the evil deeds of those who destroy the family tradition and thus give rise to unwanted children." So there's a causation there. By those people who've done that, all kinds of community projects and family welfare activities are devastated. So actually, I branched it out from the start and saying the community projects are already devastated from the initial act of destroying that family. It's already started. And then I've gone down like a general list of going, then the eternal family tradition is vanquished, that thus causing irreligion and the woman being polluted, unwanted progeny, and the ancestors fall down. That's kind of so there's a little branch off at the top, but that's it.
Yeah.
I think Varun and Tarun may definitely be different than me.
Okay, well, I'd be curious if, well, if you have the time, I'd love to see it like drawn out, scribbled out roughly to see the, the difference, and if you can send it into the WhatsApp group. So we'll hear then, we'll see Tarun Prabhu. I think he said he drew one, according to the authoritative opinions of Varunacharya.
Yeah, I guess, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it starts with the death of elderly, where the dynasty is sort of one who are the keepers of the traditions. Once they go, then the tradition, the family tradition basically stops. And once the family tradition stops, then it's number of branches here, but I think the logical one is the women's get polluted. Once the family tradition is stopped, many other things get impacted, but in this context, I think the women's get polluted comes. And of the unwanted progeny is natural sort of next to the women's getting polluted. And because the children's, they don't really have a direct line and all that, they don't see the need of giving them, the pinddan, etc. And hence like this hellish life, and the ancestors fall down. They suffer as a result. So these three are very clear together. And then the community project stops. Again, it can come after family tradition or it comes here, but I think it comes here because no one is contributing to it. There is no sort of tradition left and hence the community project stops. I think it's only because of the ancestors, sort of because of unwanted progeny, but it's kind of like you can put this one anywhere.
Yeah, I get you. So the way I do it is well, I'm biased because I just copied Gita Subodhini. I used to do it another way, and ever since I read their way, I've just done their way, which is just kulakshaya. So destruction of the dynasty results in family tradition stopping, which results in irreligion increasing, which results in women becoming polluted. By the way, both men and women do get polluted. The reason why the focus is on women is because it's women who produce the children, not the men, right? So that's why women are focused upon. It's not like some sort of misogynistic targeting, right? It just makes sense in terms of the argument flowing, right? It's not the men giving birth to the children. It's the women, right? So women become polluted. Then Varna Shankara, unwanted progeny by the mixture of Varnas. And then I've done it that those three then split into Naraka. There is hellish life. Then Patanti Pitaro, the forefathers fall down. And then also community projects and family welfare activities are destroyed. So those are the three results at the end. But honestly, even though I think that way, I think most other ways can really be justified. I don't think Arjuna particularly had a flow chart in mind when he was saying it, but I also think that it helps us, process through what Arjuna is saying to do a flow chart. So I liked all of those. We're going to take our 5-minute break. Sorry, it's a little later than normal. I just extended the activity a bit so people could get done. But yeah, we'll have our break now. I'll see you all in 5 minutes, and then we will conclude discussing that and begin discussing chapter 2. Okay, Hare Krishna. Okay, so Hare Krishna, welcome back everyone. As I said, please send a picture of all your diagrams. I'm really interested to see how you all break them down. So we find here in general, now Arjuna, he's getting a little dramatic in the sense that he escalates, right? It begins with, I'm gonna suffer, I'm not gonna have a good time. And then he says, well, you know what? My whole family will suffer as well. And then he says, everyone who's living on earth right now will suffer. Forget about everyone who's living on earth right now. Everyone who's lived on earth and everyone who has lived on earth will suffer. And then forget about that, religion itself will suffer. So we're finding that Arjuna, he's getting more and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? He's starting from this one assumption, his own suffering, his own issue, and he's building out bigger, 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 bigger like that, right? So that's the general flow of what Arjuna is saying. And therefore, at the end, and by the way, there's so many extra points we can talk about each text, like the significance of certain names used, but we just don't have time. I honestly get really sad that we can't discuss more about chapter 1, but what to do. We have to start chapter 2 soon. So then after now we've explored Arjuna's arguments, and then what do we hear? Aho bata mahat papan kartum vyavasita vayam yad rajya sukha lobhena hantum svah janam udhyata. Alas, how strange it is that we are preparing to commit greatly sinful acts. Driven by the desire to enjoy royal happiness, we are intent on killing our own kinsmen. Better for me if the sons of Dhritarashtra, weapons in hand, were to kill me unarmed and unresisting on the battlefield. This is not the way Kshatriyas normally go out, as we know from the Shastra you mentioned before, right? My spiritual master, I heard in one class, he once said, it is the dharma, the test of dharma for the Brahmin is a cold bath, and the test of dharma for the Kshatriya is to face his enemy in battle, right? Those are the two intense tests of dharma for the two types of people. Apparently it's from Mahabharata. So he says like this, and then we hear Sanjaya uvacha evam uktvarjuna sankhye rathopasta upavishat visrijya sa sharam chapam shoka samvigna manasaha. Sanjaya said, Arjuna, having thus spoken on the battlefield, cast aside his bow and arrows and sat down on the chariot, his mind overwhelmed with grief. As I mentioned last week, the bow, it represents his willingness to fight. He picks it up, he's ready to fight. Then it starts slipping from his hand as he starts seeing the opposing armies, and now he's let it down. Some of us may know, as I said, most of your knowledge of the Mahabharata will be better than mine. I'm very bad with Mahabharata pastimes, but Arjuna actually vowed to kill the person who would make him lay down this bow, the Gandiva. He said, if anyone forces me to lay this bow down, I will kill them, right? This happened once. Yudhishthira Maharaj, there was a pastime, and I'll abbreviate it. He made Arjuna drop it, and Arjuna then he didn't know what to do. He thought, I can't kill my brother, you know. But on the other hand, I vowed that I will kill whoever does it, and therefore he's given the solution: kill him with words, right? For a Kshatriya, dishonor is worse than death. So Arjuna then he goes up to Yudhishthira Maharaj and he says, you know, you're not even a Kshatriya, you're not anything, right? You let your wife get humiliated by all of the Kauravas, you gambled her away. What are you? You're not a Kshatriya, you're just some impotent weirdo like that. He spoke very heavy, bad words. And Yudhishthira Maharaj, he was very insulted and very offended. And then at the end, when Arjuna thought, okay, you know, I've killed him with words, then instantly he pays dandavats and says, I'm sorry, my brother, I just had to do it to keep my vow, right? So like this, Arjuna, he made the vow. But, and I don't know how many of you watched the class I sent. This is touching upon it a tiny bit. But what do we know? In that class, Madhavananda Prabhu, he says, what is the question of the first chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita? It's that question of suicide, right? That question of loss of identity. And we find this echoed so strongly in the fact that who is the person who makes Arjuna drop his bow now? It is Arjuna himself. He is feeling his identity going away. He is feeling all of his sense of who am I? You know, what is my identification? What is my ahankar? All of that, right? All of that which he knows as himself is going away on this battlefield. And therefore it is Arjuna himself who says, I don't see the point even of my identity. I don't even see the point of my existence. And therefore it is Arjuna who drops his bow, right? So we find this happens. And then I already touched upon the last purport last week, that it is his soft heart, right, that has qualified him to hear this knowledge. And it is his despondency in material life. And we won't have questions now. I'll just take questions at the end. Just gonna switch my slides quickly to chapter 2. Okay, so with chapter 2, I'm not going to do the overview of the second chapter initially. I'm going to do the first 10 shlokas, and then after that, we'll do an overview of the second chapter, because the first 10 shlokas, they carry on really well from what we've just discussed, right? So then what do we hear, right? Chapter 2 begins with Sanjaya. What is he saying? Tam tatha kripaya vishtam ashrupurna Kṛṣṇam vishidantam idam vakyam uvacha madhusudanaha. Here we find Madhusudan. Once again, he is being mentioned. And why is Sanjaya mentioning Madhusudan now? He's mentioning him because Dhritarashtra, he's getting happy, right? And this is how we know that Arjuna's actions are in Maya, right? Because Arjuna's actions are making Dhritarashtra happy, right? Dhritarashtra, he's getting happy hearing that Arjuna is dropping his bow, right? He's getting excited. He's thinking, yes, see, Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre indeed. But it's not my sons who are giving up. It's the sons of Pandu. So I'm very happy at this. And from there, we can infer that if you're making Dhritarashtra happy, then maybe you're not exactly doing the right thing, right? So, but in order to make clear to Sanjaya that this will not be the case, to Dhritarashtra, what does Sanjaya say? He mentions Madhusudana, right? He says, he's implying, right? Just the same as Hayagriva, he restored Vedic knowledge, so too will Krishna. And so too will he then slay the misunderstandings, and Arjuna, he will then fight, right? So here we find Madhusudana mentioned once again. And then now text 2, we hear, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kuttastva Kashmalam Midam Vishame Samupastitam Annarya Jushtamasvargyam Akirti Karamarjuna. Now Krishna has spoken his first words. And what are his first words? As Nandan Prabhu said, the friendliness, friendly times are over, right? What does he say? Actually, Nandan Prabhu, would you like to read out the English?
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, how have these impurities come upon you? They are not at all befitting a man who knows the value of life. They lead not to higher planets, but to infamy."
Jai. And we can find here that Krishna, in this one shlok, he is addressing each point actually that Arjuna has brought up so far, right? Arjuna saying, oh, I have so much compassion in my heart, right? I feel so bad about this whole thing. This is making me feel so sad. And what does Sanjaya say, right? Sanjaya describes Kripaya, right? In text 127, his heart filled with all of this kripa, all of this mercy, right? But what does Krishna say? Kuttastva kashmalam midam. Where has this dirt come from? Where has this bewilderment come from? This isn't kripa. This isn't mercy, right? This is kashmalam. This is dirt or bewilderment. Our acharyas, previous acharyas, most of them render it as bewilderment. Srila Prabhupada renders it as dirtiness, right? Both make the same sense, right? Because what is the dirt that clouds our mind? It is only bewilderment, right? They're saying the same thing. And because it's dirt, what do we know? Cheto darpana marjanam, right? The mirror of the chitta, of the heart, of the mind has been covered with all of this dirt of bewilderment. And therefore, by the chanting of Hare Krishna, we can do away with this bewilderment. And then what does he say? Arjuna, he's talking about winning and losing kingdoms and nobility, right? The noble nature of kingdoms. And Arjuna, he's pontificating about it. And what does Krishna say? Krishna simply says, this is anarya. Anarya jushtam, right? This language, this is not Aryan, right? Aryan means noble. Of course, we know there's a certain Austrian painter who made the word Aryan a little bit, he kind of ruined it a bit for everyone, but it doesn't have this heavily racial sort of baggage at this point, right? The Austrian painter is Hitler, by the way. Just so it's clear. So the Aryans, the Austrian painter, sorry, not printer, the Austrian painter. So it isn't meaning Aryan as in a racial thing. It's talking about noble people, right? People of nobility, people of noble qualities, right? People of noble qualities who are of noble character, right? And what is Krishna saying? This is anarya. You're speaking about nobility. You're speaking about kingdoms, but there's no anarya. There's no nobility in your words. And then what does he say, right? Then what did Arjuna say next? Disgraceful action, right? This is such disgraceful, terrible action. And what does Krishna say? Krishna says, well, actually the actions you're doing now, the words you were speaking about, expressing the actions you wish to do now, right? They are akirti karam. They will only cause infamy, right? They will only cause your disgrace to be known everywhere, right? And then he says, addressing the point about the heavenly planets, right? We'll mess everything up. I won't be able to attain the heavenly planets. And then this one I think is right, the most on the nose. Krishna just says, well, asvargyam, right? You're on the way to the hellish planets, not the heavenly ones. So, well, I don't know, with all of your discussion of the heavenly planets, all you've done is discuss the way to avoid them, right? So Krishna, right, this is like a slap in the face, you know, Arjuna, he's just opened up this actually really good arguments. Again, Arjuna's arguments are good, and that's why they're valuable, right? We're not setting up something, just some simple points, right? So Krishna, he chastises Arjuna's reasoning, right? He doesn't explain why they're wrong yet. You might say, well, that doesn't answer anything. In which case I'd say, just wait, there's a whole 17 chapters of Krishna explaining why it's not good reasoning. But essentially, what we find here is that Krishna, he's chastised, right? He's chastised it. He said, this is all incorrect. You've spoken, because up until now, Krishna said nothing, right? Krishna's just listened and listened and listened, right? So because of that, we didn't know what Krishna would say. And then Krishna says this, right? Now, before we get onto the nectar purport, and this purport is a nectar one, I just want to touch upon why Krishna said that Arjuna is just wrong in every respect. Shivam Prabhu, would you like to read out this purport from the first chapter?
The words nimittani, viparitani are significant. When a man sees only frustration in his expectations, he thinks, why am I here? Everyone is interested in himself and his own welfare. No one is interested in the Supreme Self. Arjuna is showing ignorance of his real self-interest by Krishna's will.
Yes. So here we find, right? Here we find the root of the issue, right? And we'll discuss this a bit before moving on to the next points, before discussing questions. So what Srila Prabhupada is saying here, right? So if we go back to text 130, if you check, you can find that nimittani viparitani, right, is described, right? So what is the root of Arjuna's issues? Arjuna, he is calculating this whole thing in terms of sympathy of his material identification. Arjuna is thinking, what do I get out of this? Who is on the other side? Who can benefit me? What pain and suffering will this cause me? Again, remember I talked about the escalation just a few minutes ago. All of his issues are based on what will happen to me, right? Me and mine. Arjuna, he's feeling sympathetic. Why? He's not feeling sympathetic and sad that people will die, right? He's feeling sad and sympathetic that the people he identifies with will die. He is just as much on the platform of Mamakaha that Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra are, right? Because it's seeing Drona and Bhishma that has Arjuna break down. If that army was an army of strangers, Arjuna would fight them like that, right? If that army was filled with people he didn't know, right? He would have just killed them. He would have just fought valiantly, and he would have fought and, you know, established goodness in the realm again. But because he's seeing people and he goes, oh, Mamakaha, when he sees the opposing armies, this is why Arjuna is breaking down, right? This is the root of his issue. The issue isn't that Arjuna doesn't want to fight, actually. The issue isn't that. The issue is that Arjuna doesn't want to fight because he sees the opposite side and he sees Mamakaha. He sees his identity. And therefore, he is perpetuating the same mindset that has caused this war to begin with. What has caused this war to start? Mamakaha Pandavaschaiva. This mindset, right? This mindset of my sons and the sons of Pandu. But Arjuna, he's having the exact same mindset. He's seeing the opposite armies and he's saying, oh no, these are my people and therefore I cannot fight. In this way, there will never be peace, right? In the kingdom, right? In this way, there will never be peace because the solution, Arjuna's so-called solution, is based on the issue that has caused it, right? The violence of the Bhagavad-Gītā, right? The violence of the Bhagavad-Gītā, which is often discussed, right? It's saying, oh, you know, he's being called to action. He's being called to violence, right? He's being called to fight, right? But that's actually not it. Actually, the whole Bhagavad-Gītā is about ahimsa, non-violence, right? But it's going to the root of violence. We might think, what is violence? And this is actually a complex question. You'll find there's whole academic schools that study the concept of violence. What does it mean for something to be violent? And Krishna's point here is that Arjuna is being the most violent. Why? Because Krishna is doing the violence of separating people into me and mine, and yours and theirs, right? Them and theirs. This is the violence of the Bhagavad-Gītā, and this is the issue Arjuna is having. There will be no peace if Arjuna establishes peace on the platform of they and them and me and mine, right? This is the root of Arjuna's illusion, right? He is thinking, what can I get out of this? And he sees the opposite side, and he sees part of himself, and he says, oh, well, this doesn't benefit me, and this doesn't benefit what I identify with. And therefore, Arjuna is causing, his solution is no solution at all, because his solution is perpetuating the root problem, right? The solution to all of this should be non-violence, right? But it should be a non-violence that is meaningful, that comes to the root of the issue, which is the violence of, again, demarcating people, separating people, identifying with all of these material things, rather than identifying with people as spirit souls, right? Identifying with people by saying, I am this and you are that, right? Then we open up violence. Srila Prabhupada, he has this wonderful class where he talks about the partition of India, right? And he talks about all the communal violence that happened there, right? Hindu, Muslim, Pakistani, Indian, right? He talks about all of these things, and he says he was there and he saw, right, the outburst of fighting that happened there. And there was a lot of deaths, right? Many Pakistanis and many Indians, many Hindus, many Muslims were dead. But what does he say? He says all of the bodies were thrown into the same grave at the end, right? At the end, there was one big pit that was built, and all of the bodies were thrown into that pit, right? What is Prabhupada's point? All of these designations, people will obsess about them, but at the end of the day, people are still humans, people are still spirit souls, and there's no distinction of yours and mine's and them and their, you know what I mean? There's none of this distinction there. At the end of the day, all of the bodies are again, they corrode away, they decay away. Those bodies are discarded, and all of those designations meant nothing, right? And that violence, and we've seen in history, all of violence can be rooted in what? Us versus them. Again, I mentioned Hitler earlier. What is Hitler's whole rhetoric? Those evil other people, right? And there we have the great horrors, right? Some of the greatest horrors, great obviously in the terms of big, right? Some of the biggest horrors in history, it's us versus them, right? Virtually every war is we on this side must go fight against them, right? We can think of terrorism, right? All terrorist attacks are based on us versus them, right? We must attack them, right? Us, right? And then of course the responses, all of the terrible invasions and all that have happened, us versus them, right? They have done this, therefore we must do this, right? All of these things are built on these designations, right? So what is the violence of the Bhagavad-Gītā? The violence of the Bhagavad-Gītā is us versus them. And therefore, Krishna, he is addressing this. Because in Arjuna's apparent non-violence, he is committing the greatest violence. Does this make sense, or have I lost anyone? So this is why, even though there's seemingly a good point being made here, Krishna, he is not at all satisfied with what has been said. Rani Mataji, I saw you unmuted.
Oh no, Prabhuji, you just said, you asked if this makes sense.
Oh, okay, yeah. So from here, I'm emphasizing this point because I think it's a very important point, because if we don't understand this, then Krishna just comes off a little weird, right? It's like, why is Krishna pushing for this war to happen? Why is Krishna pushing for violence? Krishna is not pushing for violence. The whole Bhagavad-Gītā is a push for non-violence, right? But cutting to the core of it, right? Cutting to the core root cause of non-violence. Krishna is saying the apparent non-violence of Arjuna is actually a deep violence. And therefore, the rest of the Bhagavad-Gītā is spoken to come to end this non-violence. Not to end this non-violence, to end this violence, right? Okay, so we'll continue going ahead then. So the purport, nectarian purport, it's really, really amazing. The second chapter just begins with some amazing purports. So going on now, we find this. And firstly, before we discuss this, actually, when we think of God, often we think of a very Greek idea of the definition of God. I'm not sure how many of you have heard the words omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, right? The omnis, right? Some of you would have heard some of them, right? Omnipotent means, what does omnipotent mean? Omnipotent means he can, oh yeah?
All powerful, somebody who has all the power.
Yes, who can do anything. He has the potency to do anything, right? What is omniscient? Omniscient means, sorry?
Present everywhere.
No, that's omnipresent.
Oh, sorry.
Omniscient means all-knowing. Yes. So these are the ways that we often think, and this is a very Greek way of thinking, right? This is where our minds have very much been forged by the Western world, and not for any bad reason. I don't think we have any. I have no issue with any of the omnis, right? But it's interesting that shastrically speaking, in our line, that is not our beginning point for identifying the qualities of God, what defines God, right? We can accept them. I find no issue in saying omnipresent, omniscient. These omnis are the beginning point of how we can find the Greco-Christian tradition defining God. And again, it's a very valid definition. However, our omnis, if you will, right? The Gauriya Vaishnava understanding of how we establish what is the foundational understanding of God are these 6 qualities, right? Mrugank Prabhu, would you like to recite the Sanskrit?
Yes. Aishvaryasya samagrasya viryasya yashasah shriyah jnana vairagya yoschapi shannam bhaga itingana.
Jai, thank you. And then Alex, would you like to read out the English?
Yeah, Bhaga of 6 parts is defined as complete control, complete influence, complete excellent qualities of body, mind and words, complete beauty or wealth, complete knowledge, and complete detachment from worldly affairs.
Yes, so this is the translation Bhanu Maharaj gives, but I'll get onto Prabhupada's translation on the next slide. These 6 qualities, this is our understanding. When we speak of Bhagavan, when we speak of God, we speak of somebody who is complete in these 6 respects. So we can say complete, we can also say the most, right? The maximal. The word is hard to translate, right? But it means somebody who is the most, somebody who is complete, and somebody who is maximally in all of these. So Srila Prabhupada, he has given these here, right? Who possesses all riches, all strength, all fame, all beauty, all knowledge, all renunciation. He is called Bhagavan, right? This is the definition of God, right? This is the definition that we understand, right? So again, I'm not saying there's nothing bad with saying omnipotent, omniscient. Those are all good things. But when we start on our first step, when we start, what is our basic understanding of God? It is somebody who possesses all riches, all strength, all fame, all beauty, all knowledge, and all renunciation. Please memorize this. This may or may not be in your end of module exam. So these 6 qualities are very, very important. Now, I just want to touch on one thing quickly. There's one that sometimes confuses people. It doesn't seem to make sense. Does anyone want to guess which one is hard to attach to Krishna?
Renunciation.
Renunciation, right? Everyone else agrees, right? It's a bit weird because, you know, we see Krishna, we don't exactly see renunciation, you know? Krishna, in many ways, we could say he's the complete opposite of renunciation, right? Krishna is the enjoyer, right? He is by definition not very renounced. But actually, we can understand Krishna's renunciation in 2 ways. Yes, self-sufficient is one way. Krishna, even though he owns the whole universe, because the whole universe is his part and parcel, right? Even though he owns the whole universe, he doesn't need any of it to exist. And therefore, he is the most renounced. This is one way. But another way to understand it, there's the 2 ways. Another way to understand it is a point that I've been stressing a lot in the Bhagavad-Gītā. Because again, who is Krishna in the Bhagavad-Gītā? What is he doing? He's a chariot driver, right? So Krishna is the most renounced, that even though he is the supreme personality of Godhead, even though Krishna is Swayam Bhagavan, even though Krishna is so full of all of the qualities that qualify him to be the worshipable object of all reality, even though Krishna is the enjoyer of all that exists, even though Krishna is he who deserves all service and all worship and all work directed towards him, even though all of these things are his natural right, he renounces all of them in order to serve his devotee. The most entitled person of service is the one who gives the most service to his devotees. And therefore, Krishna renounces even the greatest thing. He renounces all that Godhood entitles him to in order to simply serve his devotees simply as their friend or child, so on and so forth. And in that sense, no one can be more renounced than Krishna, because no one is entitled to all that Godhood is entitled to. Right? And the fact that Krishna renounces the greatest entitlement means that therefore he is the most renounced, and not only the most renounced, but the completely renounced, because he has renounced the completeness of entitlement. Does that make sense? Okay, so please memorize these 6 as you go along. Okay, so then what's the time? Okay, we'll keep going for another few minutes and then we'll have questions. So then after Krishna has said this, we also find there is the distinction between Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, but I will discuss that later on in the course. So actually, you know what? I'm not going to go into these next points because I think it'll ruin the flow. I'll open up to any questions, and then if we don't have any questions, then I'll keep on going. But yeah, Nandan, Prabhu.
Prabhu, it's just on these points. On and probably the renunciation point. Krishna says, "Patram pushpam phalam toyam," like he accepts whatever the devotee gives him. He accepts the love, the mood of love, and we know that Krishna is controlled by love, and he wouldn't. He doesn't reject anything offered in pure love of him. So in one sense, is he not renounced in that respect? He could not be renounced in that respect.
That he doesn't renounce the offerings, right?
Yeah, I know. Some people say, well, like he doesn't give, for example, to gopis, he doesn't give them his presence, and that's a show of his renunciation, which also increases their love for him. So I know it's a deep point, but I was just thinking perhaps he's not all renounced with respect to the devotees, and maybe those things, those 6 opulences are limited to the respect of his pure devotees.
Yeah, no, very good question. There's a lot to unpack with that. Firstly, we can also say, in one sense, Krishna, he's almost altered when he's in his complete form, right? Because he sort of likes to break the rules for bhakti, but and in that sense, we can say he's not very renounced, right? But the way I would understand this personally is we hear in Srimad Bhagavatam that bhakti is a haituki. It is causeless. It has no cause. And our acharyas have explained this to say that bhakti, devotion itself, devotion herself, is independent and supreme. Nothing dictates to bhakti, Devi, where she should go or what she should do, right? Even Krishna himself, in a sense, Bhakti Devi is independent of him, right? Bhakti Devi comes from him because it is his potency, but Bhakti Devi has an almost independent direction where she goes. So because of this, Bhakti Devi, she's independent, and where she goes is not determined by Krishna or anyone else. It's only determined by the devotees, which is again why the devotees are so important. The devotees are imbued with bhakti, and therefore they can sort of influence where Bhakti Devi goes, right? But at the end of the day, bhakti goes where bhakti wills to go, right? Therefore, when bhakti is given to Krishna or somebody is taken up into devotion, that bhakti is not coming necessarily by Krishna's will, right? And when that bhakti is offered to Krishna, Krishna can't help but accept it, right? Krishna can't help but accept it. So is it renunciation? I would say it still is renunciation, right? Because it's not something that Krishna is almost willingly accepting, if you get what I mean. Krishna says he accepts them, of course, when he's explaining the philosophy, but bhakti goes of her own accord, right? And in that sense, we can't say that Krishna, he is forcing it all, right? You get what I mean? He's claiming it, right? Renunciation means you're not claiming it, right? Where a sannyasi is renounced because they will take whatever is coming their way, right? So he has renounced it because bhakti is again independent and supreme. That's how I'd answer that. But you can, I'm feeling from the nature of the question, you could approach it from all sorts of angles. Does that answer your question or not?
That's a very nice answer, Prabhu. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Vidhi Mataji.
Oh, Prabhu, I was on a train of thoughts, and when you started explaining bhakti, I just lost my question completely.
That's all right. Sorry, I'm notoriously bad at long answers.
Not at all. But okay, no, it's coming back to me, but not in totality.
Once you remember, just raise your hand or message in the group again, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks. Sorry for that.
No problem at all. Happens to the best of us. Shri Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Yes. So going back to that renunciation opulence, I think I'm getting how does that kind of link to Bhakta-vatsala? Like, I think I'm getting a little bit confused with like the Bhakta-vatsala bit, like when Krishna renounces everything for his devotees as well, like even though he is like so worshipable. So if you could please explain.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I really like this topic, so I like that question. So the whole idea is Krishna, by the nature of being God, right? You can hear in almost every culture and religion and philosophy on earth, God is worthy of all praise and honor, right? God is worthy of everything, right? He's entitled to service, right? But when he's Bhakta-vatsala, he is serving his devotee, right? So Krishna is worthy of all service, of all worship, irregardless of anything else, right? He could do nothing back, and Krishna deserves that service. Krishna doesn't need to earn the right to be served, right? Krishna doesn't need to earn any of it. Krishna could do nothing but just dance, and the whole universe would be required naturally to serve and worship him by his nature of being the all-attractive, infinitely wonderful Krishna. Then the fact that conquered by that love, he in turn instead serves his devotee. He's renouncing that, right? He's renouncing that right that he has to be served by these individuals for no other reason, right? For no other reason other than he is Krishna, right? So he's renouncing the fact that he should be getting service from everyone else, right? He should be served by all of his devotees, right? And that's the greatest wealth he can have, to be served, right, by all of these wonderful personalities. And instead he says, no, I will serve them. Does that help clarify it? It's all right if it doesn't.
No, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, no problem. Rohan Prabhu.
Sorry, I think this might be a long question.
No problem.
So we say that in Bhagavad-Gita, the reason the Pandavas are fighting is because they're upholding the principles of Dharma, and more so they're fighting for the pleasure of Krishna. Is there any justified reason for wars and fighting in today's world? And like, if we say that other religions are bona fide, like Islam, Christianity, and they're fighting each other, based on their Dharma, like, how can we understand that through Bhagavad-Gita?
Yeah, that's a big question. But firstly, with the Pandavas fighting, His Holiness Bhakti-Vikas Swami Maharaj gave an amazing class like a few hours ago. I think it released this morning or late last night on this topic, right? Because it's a very relevant topic, right? And in this, he in this class, he's discussing it. And he's talking about how a few people, they're saying there's this rhetoric online. Krishna told Arjuna to fight, therefore all the followers of Bhagavad-Gita, we should grab our arms and we should fight against everywhere. We should fight and conquer and all this stuff. There's some people who are saying like this, and Bhakti-Vikas Maharaj, if any of you listen to Bhakti-Vikas Maharaj's classes, he can be pretty heavy, right? So he gave a very heavy chastising response. And in that response, he was saying, if you put half the energy you put into, and I'm not saying this about you, I'm saying this about people who have that mentality. You put half the energy that you put into writing angry comments on the internet, into reading the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad-Gita, you would realize why this is not a valid point. Because in the Mahabharata, we find that there's 4 steps, and I'm now mind blanking the Sanskrit, maybe somebody will know and send it off, that you should do before coming to battle, right? Fighting in a war is the absolute last option. There is no option after it, and there's every option before it. fighting in a war is the last option. You can in fact find there's narratives of Yudhishthira Maharaj, even in the minutes preceding the Kurukshetra war, he is still trying to diplomatically prevent the war from happening. He is still negotiating the war not to happen, right? Furthermore, Krishna himself actually tries to negotiate at one point and they reject it, right? Every other means should be taken. Like this war is a war inherently of self-defense, right? If Arjuna doesn't fight, it's not just that, oh, he won't stop the bad guys. It's that there will be severe injustice in the lack of self-defense for the Pandavas, right? So firstly, there's that. We have to contextualize this war. This is not a war that's happening because the Pandavas and the Kauravas don't like each other, and the Kauravas were a little bad, so therefore the Pandavas, because they have Krishna on their side, we like them, and therefore we're supporting them, right? This war is a war inherently of self-defense. That's the first thing, right? So contextually, their dharma is to act in self-defense, right? And their dharma is also to use every single means. Pacifism is in general the message of the Mahabharata, but it's a pragmatic pacifism, right? At one point, it does make sense to fight, right? At one point, if you're being punched in the face, you should maybe punch somebody back. You know what I mean? If you're getting punched in the face, maybe you don't punch them back, right? Tell them to stop. If they keep on hitting you and you're close to the point of death, then maybe you should push them away. That's maybe a better analogy for the Mahabharata's approach, right? So we have that first. Contextually, that's not the sort of, and Bhakti Vikas Maharaj, I'll maybe send the class into the WhatsApp group, but he first says we need to contextualize the actual fighting of the Bhagavad-Gita there. Furthermore, we also need to contextualize the message of the Bhagavad-Gita in what I was saying. The reason why this non-violence is bad is because it was rooted in violence itself. If this non-violence was rooted in non-violence itself, then that non-violence is better. And that's why the negotiations and all are praised, because that was non-violence based not on the mood of Mamakaha Pandavaschaiva, but it was non-violence rooted in the mood of we want peace because ultimately there is no you and me, we want unity, right? So firstly, there's that, just to contextualize Krishna asking Arjuna to fight. That's the first section. Second thing to note is actually Arjuna would have fought either way. Jiva Goswami, he mentions this. Irregardless of what would have happened, Arjuna would have gotten over it and fought. And we will discuss this as we get deeper into the Bhagavad-Gita. Krishna actually indirectly says this in one shloka. He says something about the qualities of Arjuna. I'm now forgetting which shlok, which indicates that actually Arjuna would have fought irregardless if Krishna spoke or not. So therefore, the Bhagavad-Gita actually isn't so much encouraging the fighting as much as it is there to dispel the misconception, right? And we'll touch upon that a little deeper when we get to that shlok. But lastly, then coming to the point, when we say all religions, all bona fide religions are valid, and that is true, but we're speaking about those religions as they were established by their founders, right? And by their message, right? So Srila Prabhupada, the two big religions that Srila Prabhupada would often mention because of his context were Islam and Christianity. There's one purport where Srila Prabhupada says something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, that the world was blessed that personalities such as Hazrat Muhammad and Jesus walked upon it. Srila Prabhupada writes this in one purport, right? And because what they preached was a way for the certain areas they're in to come to a higher level of God consciousness, right? So it's not that that is true. However, Prabhupada also says, and he says this also in light of the Vedic traditions, that they can be twisted, right? And say something wrong. All of the wars we're seeing right now, political or religious, I would say almost virtually all of them are very hard to justify in terms of Shastra, right? There's a whole lot of Duryodhans leading the world, but there's not many Arjunas. You really need somebody of the quality of Arjuna to, I mean, we don't even have people of the quality of Duryodhan leading, really, right? We could really pray every day that we would have a leader as good as Duryodhana. Forget about a leader as good as Arjuna or Yudhishthira. So in terms of their religion being bona fide, yes, it is bona fide if it's practiced in the way that it was given, right? And the way it was given will sometimes contradict Vedic principles, but we should understand that that was for the time, place, and circumstance that they were preached in, right? Prabhupada would even say this. One of his disciples said, oh, but Muslims, they eat meat. And Prabhupada said, well, You know, they're in the area they were living in, it's hard to grow vegetables, right? What was he going to do? Tell them to starve to death, right? So Prabhupada was very practical in this way. That doesn't mean we start eating meat, right? But I'm just saying Prabhupada was actually very flexible in recognizing the contribution, right? The contribution of all of these leaders. However, Prabhupada was also very critical of people who are twisting the message. You'll find Prabhupada praising Jesus and praising Christians, and you'll also find him criticizing Christians a lot. And you also find him praising Muhammad and praising Muslims. You'll also find him criticizing certain Islamic abuses as well, right? So we don't accept virtually all of the violence that's happening in the name of religion today, because all of that is a perversion, right? And Prabhupada writes this also in a purport. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada's written this purport where he says the violence that's going on in the name of Islam today is being decried by many Muslims, and you know, it's not valid, right? It's not bona fide. So that's that one tangent regarding the bona fide nature of religions. Just because they're founded by a bona fide individual according to time, place, and circumstance, and just because they can be bona fide doesn't mean every instance is bona fide. And when you study Christian and Islamic texts, you'll find they're actually not calling for violence at all, in the same way that the Bhagavad-Gītā is not calling for violence. I can talk about that for a while, but I don't want to go too much over time, right? But then again, right? So that's regarding their dharma being valid and their violence being valid. Their dharma is valid, but the violence is being perpetuated in it is not, because it's not in line with their religion as it was preached. In terms of saying though, oh, but we find here instances where war can be valid, again, I would just go back to that other point. In order for war to be validly fought, it needs to be fought by valid people. I don't think there's been valid people to fight wars in maybe even the past few thousand years. You could say Kurukshetra was the last valid war, right? I'm not saying that strictly. I don't know the details of every war, but you could reasonably say that, right? World War I, it's often said was a war of different aristocratic families who disliked each other. There was no reason for World War I to happen other than royal families being envious of each other, if you study the history of the First World War. And the reason you can find this, there's a famous truce. It's called a Christmas truce, where the German armies and the British armies, on Christmas, they stopped fighting and they had a Christmas party together. And they all celebrated together. They showed each other their wives and they gave gifts even, right? And then the day after, they all had to go back to fighting, and it was terrible. Then none of them wanted to fight because they all just really liked each other, right? This shows that there was no reason why they should be fighting. These were people who got along, who didn't dislike each other. And furthermore, they had no reason to fight, right? This is an invalid war. They're only fighting this war because the British influential families disliked the German influential families, and they pushed the whole countries to go to war and kill each other. So I think when we see examples of this, of like wars just being fought for literally no reason, I think we can say that most wars in history, political or religious, really just don't have much founding. Again, wars are only a last resort, and they need to be a last resort as determined by righteous people. Because there was a lot of aspects to your question, that was a long answer. Does that address it, or was there anything I missed?
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Any other questions? Vidhi Mataji, did you remember your question?
Sort of, Prabhu. I guess you partly answered my question when you were talking about Bhakti-Vatsala, but then nonetheless, I'll state. So when we're talking about renunciation, you know, he's the ultimate renunciate. But then we see that, you know, this whole world, the creation that he's done. You just mentioned that, you know, he does not need to, he can exist even without the creation that he's made, but nonetheless, he still made it. And at the same time, you know, we always come across in the scriptures certain things where it said that Krishna, it's for Krishna's enjoyment. So he enjoys certain things. So all his pastimes are because he wanted to indulge into some things. So you mentioned during explaining Bhakti-Vatsala that he chooses to do that. Does that mean the other things that happen, you know, the whole creation and all the pastimes that he did, he was moving away from renunciation because he chose to move away from renunciation? Because these two are very contradicting things, right? One side we're saying he's the ultimate renunciate. On the other side, we see his pastimes, his pleasures, and, you know, creation of the world and all that stuff. Can't relate the two.
That's a good question. Also, by the way, just quickly, as I always say, everyone is always free to leave at 12, right? If you want to know the homework, I always send it in the WhatsApp group, just in case you have to be anywhere in a rush, just as a heads up. So regarding that question, firstly, it's not that Krishna can exist without these worlds, because actually all of these worlds exist necessarily because Krishna exists, right? The material world, chintya bheda bheda tattva. That Krishna exists means that the world will exist, right? Because it's one of his energies, right? The potential to manifest the material world is there, and therefore Krishna does manifest it. If he didn't, he wouldn't be filled with all strength, right? He wouldn't have all potency, right? So the material world exists, it has to exist. It's not that he chooses, right? It's that he doesn't need any of it for him to exist, right? But in terms of his pastimes aren't there because he needs to. Krishna's pastimes are an outpouring. Krishna's pastimes don't come in the same way that our activities come because we need something or we want something, right? Krishna's pastimes are an outpouring of his fullness. Krishna is full and satisfied in of himself, and he is so full and satisfied that satisfaction pours out of him. And that satisfaction pouring out of him is Leela and pastime. His pastime is not coming because he needs something and therefore he does it. His pastime is coming because he's so complete and so full of joy. He expresses that joy in a dance, in a game, in all of these pastimes that he has, right? So all of Krishna's pastimes are coming forth from his inherent satisfaction, right? And they all pour outwards. And therefore it's not him hankering for anything. It's him expressing his completeness rather than trying to take something to complete himself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's beautifully explained, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, if not, then we will conclude. I'll still mention the homework. The reason why I didn't mention it earlier is I still haven't decided exactly what the reading should be. But if everyone hopefully got to text 30, I'm just having you all read a little bit ahead so that you're familiar and have internalized the second chapter before we hit the different points. So if everyone's read to text, no, I said up to text 25, didn't I? Yeah. So then read texts 26 to 37. And I've just given a short section there just so that, because I've realized the other section might have been a little rough for all of you to break it down into the sections. But put a bit of care into breaking down into sections. And also, just as a quick heads up before we conclude, when I give the sections, the way I've broken up the readings isn't necessarily how it's broken up into the chapter. So try and keep that in mind when you break down the readings. Think of each reading as adding on to last week, continuing last week's reading, rather than a different section of the chapter. Just so you don't get confused with the way you divide the chapter, because it might be that the next few shlokas tie into a previous category as you've broken it down. So with all that, please enjoy reading the Bhagavad-Gita this week, and I'll see you all next week. Please shoot any messages that you have in the group chat. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji.
Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji.